A couple years ago, I did a Sentai panel on the Marvel era of Super Sentai when Marvel teamed up with Toei, which talked about the shows from the 70s up through Sun Vulcan in 1981. I also have done a panel in the past on the Sentai series from the 1990s, from Jetman through Time Ranger. If you are used to Sentai shows from the 1990s, the 1990s was like an experimentation period of Sentai. They had come out of the 80s, obviously that's why it's the 90s. They decided to move past repeated themes, which in the 80s, pretty much Hirohisa Soda was a man who was born in 1947. He became a writer on the original anime Gatchaman, was hired by Toei during when Go Ranger, the original Super Sentai show, was airing, and was a writer for every Sentai series until Toei said in 1982 or at 1981, hey, we'd like you to be the head writer for the next Sentai show. And this ended up leading to Hirohisa Soda leading off 9 Sentai series from 1982 to 1990. So I'm going to be talking about a little bit about his series that he worked on. One of the things that Hirohisa Soda was big on was science. Science! So because he had worked on Gatchaman, which was centered around science, that's what a lot of his themes were in the 80s. It did have some alien technology because Star Wars was a big thing. So we had aliens in here. And then, for, like I was saying, with the 90s, they were doing all different themes. They were doing fantasy, they did a parody, they did car and magic, they did Earth themes, time travel. So they were just trying all new things that the 80s did not do. So to start, here is my introduction to the panel.
That sounds fancy.
That's the point.
Now, was anybody alive in the 80s? Oh, thank God.
Technically?
Technically?
I was barely alive in the 90s.
Same.
Okay, you need to go home.
Okay.
Hey, I'm 21.
So in 1982, the year I was born, Hirohisa Soda released his first Sentai series called Gogoro 5. Gogoro 5 was basically about a group of gymnasts, sports players, because with the Olympics coming, they wanted to do something sports-like. For the most part, the series pretty much stayed in tone with the series prior to it. So this was kind of like the time when it was they still kind of positioned it as a 70s show because it has that feel despite being in the 80s. So here's just a little clip on this team.
Get prepared for something very racist.
Oh, yes.
Hey.
So after Go-Go 5, the next series was actually one that it actually is the name Science Sentai Dynamon, where they were just a bunch of scientists who were gathered together to fight an evil empire, because that's what they all were then. So here are some clips from Dynamon, which also was originally brought to America with a parody dub back in the 80s on a late night television series.
Yes, and you can watch it on Verve as well.
Did you hear that, Smithers? That was the sound of Michael Bay having an orgasm.
After Dynamon, Soda came out with Bioman, which was a series that introduced a Sentai team where hundreds of years ago, from this ancient planet that was full of technology, the Mecha and the robot assistant infused a bunch of samurai and a princess with these particles called bioparticles. Hundreds of years later, well, I guess only a couple hundred years later, villains come up from the Earth, so they have to, basically, the robots finds the descendants of those people that were injected with these particles, and they become the Rangers. This series was pretty infamous also because this one didn't have any growing monsters. It was basically their generals, and then they had their own monster of the week who would stay with them throughout the whole series. So it was not a traditional Monster of the Week show, it was just the same generals over and over the entire time, whereas like what the mechs they would pilot would be different and act as their Monsters of the Week. Also, this series is notable for because it killed off a Ranger and replaced the Ranger with a new character.
The better in some cases. So we'll just go straight.
1, 2, 3, 4, そうです。バイバイ。やれ。
I know where I've seen those before.
Now, Changeman is an interesting series as it is the first series to have a mythological theme to it. So all the Rangers, they had a dragon, a Pegasus, a Phoenix, a mermaid. What's the last one I'm missing? Griffin, thank you. And another thing that is interesting about Changeman is one thing that Hirohisa Soda's era did early on is they had an interesting way of doing camera work with their Sentai shows. So I also picked on here a clip that I felt really highlighted because it's actually my favorite scene from this series. Another notable aspect about Changeman is it was a militaristic aspect. So all 5 Rangers were part of a military organization that were given these abilities called the Earth Force. That the organization mixed the science with the mythological powers. So after Changeman came Flashman, obviously as you can see from the text. Flashman was a series that these aliens abducted 5 babies from Earth, brought them to Planet Flash. There they decided they were taken care of by aliens and were given the abilities and training to take revenge on those that kidnapped them. Yet, to me, that kind of sounds like Stockholm Syndrome, because they trained on that planet. So Flashman was considered infamous because it was essentially Rangers that were kind of alien to Earth, and then returned to Earth to take revenge for their lost childhood.
Let's go! Flash! Green flash! Green flash! Yellow flash! Green flash!
King of the impossible. He's for every one of us. Stand for every one of us. We stand
So as you saw also in that clip that it had a little bit of the camera work that you saw in the Changeman clip. Flashman has some other notable aspects to it that I'll get into when I go over the Mecha. But our next series was Maskman. Now Maskman combines science with ki, or chi, depending on how you pronounce it. And in this series, so it was essentially the first martial arts based Sentai series that you would see later on with Dai Ranger, Geki Ranger. And this one was quite notable, for which I'll get into in a moment after we introduce the main cast.
Music's the same.
Now those of you that are used to 90s Sentai, who grew up on Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, obviously the first series in America, we were introduced to Tommy the Green Ranger, which was from the show Jude Ranger with Dragon Ranger. And every show afterwards was pretty consistent, having a sixth ranger outside of a few exceptions. And then from the 2000s onward, we pretty much have had a sixth ranger every series, because now it's a staple that everyone feels that, oh, well, this is our toy sales for the first, second quarter of the show. To the point where even now they're having 10, 12, 400 different rangers.
Sometimes they're announced in the first week of the show's premiere.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Like, for the current series, Lupin Ranger versus Potts Ranger, the 6th Ranger, well, technically 7th Ranger, Lupin X, Patra X, was announced. Actually, I think he was even announced technically a week before the show premiered. I think it was. And he didn't show up to episode 20, but still, like, oh, there's going to be a 6th Ranger character in here. Cool. Not that I was surprised anymore. Because the way I looked at it is in the 90s, the 6th Ranger was there, he showed up, he kicked ass, he chewed bubblegum, and then he went away. And then he was there to help the Rangers when he was needed the next time. It made the 6th Ranger feel special. Nowadays, it's pretty much, it's a 6th Ranger. That's cool. But June Ranger was not the first show to have a 6th Ranger. It was Maskman. Maskman had a 6th Ranger for one episode. He used a prototype suit, and one episode is being generous because he was on screen for 2 minutes in costume. But the concept was there. It was something unique that Japan had never seen before, an interesting idea that planted seeds for what would come later.
That was a bit anticlimactic.
Isn't that the same helmet as one of the Battle Fever ones? That's almost the Red Ranger helmet, isn't it?
It's similar, but it's not quite there.
Oh, it's green.
Right. But it does match a lot. And Toei's notorious for reusing costumes in later series. Car Ranger has some reuse of monsters from Kaku Ranger. One of the costumes, I want to say from Sun Vulcan it is. Or maybe it's Denjimon. So they're notorious. They have some costumes from Jude Ranger in there.
Well, Kaku Ranger even reused monsters as yokai.
So our next series, Liveman, was the first. There was already previously a Super Sentai that introduced a 3-man team that stuck through the entire series. Liveman started out with a 3-man team, and then moved on to bringing 2 more Rangers in the second half of the show, a Green and Black Ranger, who were, at the beginning of Liveman, 2 of the potential Rangers are killed. Later on in the series, the Green and Black Rangers are the siblings to the 2 characters that were killed at the beginning of the show that become part of the team. And just kind of like Flashman, there's more to talk about with Liveman in the mech section, because a lot of the Ranger aspect was pretty much your standard fare. Red Ranger was the one who got the most focus.
Stoic.
Black and blue were kind of just there. And then green got pregnant somehow.
Green! Yellow! Royal! Green! Choose Sentai!
I'm impressed. He won a stare down and he couldn't even see his eyes.
That's cheating at that.
Also,
now for the 80s most bizarre show.
Yes, Turbo Ranger combined science with fairy magic.
What?
And it was a car themed. It was also the first Sentai series to have high schoolers be Rangers. And technically, this is also the first Sentai series to use Ranger in its title.
Huh.
Two things on that. Gold Ranger originally was not, Gold Ranger and Jack were not originally considered Super Sentai series at this time. They considered Super Sentai to start with Battle Fever J. It wasn't until O Ranger when they said, hey, if we put Gold Ranger and Jacka as a Super Sentai series, we can celebrate 20 years of the franchise. And that's a great milestone. Especially because O Ranger, they brought in writers from the 80s to work on the show. So also the other note is Gold Ranger, technically Toei's official English language spelling of it is G-O-R-E-N-G-E-R. So there's also that aspect that it's Gold Ranger with an E, making Turbo Ranger originally their first Ranger series, because everything at that time used Man or a different series like Sun Vulcan. So here is a little bit of Turbo Ranger. Now, even though you'll see the villains later, Turbo Ranger was such a low-rated series that Toei decided to kill off the main villains in the halfway through the show and introduce new villains to take over. Our next series, Fiveman, is the first Sentai series to have siblings be the Rangers. Somewhere in space, these kids and their parents are on this planet trying to restore plant life to the planet. Aliens invade the planet, and the siblings have to flee the planet. Well, they don't know what happens to their parents because their parents get them out of there on their own, and they're left with a robot nanny, basically. There's something else I wanted to say on Fiveman. What was it? I don't remember now. So Fiveman had that aspect going for it. The Black and Yellow Ranger were twins, which was kind of creepy when you think about it, because in real life, the actors got married. Only Japan.
I don't know, there's a reason the term caste incest.
Now, Fiveman is also the first series to have Rangers receive an upgrade form, which was barely even used and barely did much of anything.
I mean, it's better than Mighty Morphin Season 3 with the glitter.
They're shiny.
They were just
they
were just in their twilight preteens.
Ah, it's been how many years? Anyways.
Enough.
A long time.
Yes.
But still funny.
25, give or take.
So the mecha in the 80s. One thing you'll note, again, if you're used to the 90s where you've got like evolutions like Dragon Caesar, in Die Ranger where some of the mechs acted as more armored for Ryuseo and Wan Tiger and all kinds of intricate mechs like a train mech in Go-Go 5. A lot of the mecha here was pretty boxy. It looked like basically that a guy was just wearing boxes on his body. There's also some mechs that look quite similar. Like I actually think Dyna-Robo and Change Robo look pretty much the same outside of the face, and they both look like Dairuger from Dairuger 15 or Vehicle Voltron to me. There are a couple of notable aspects with the mecha though. Changeman was the first series to have a mech battle underwater. Liveman was the first mech series to have an animal mech. Usually if there was a series with animal themes, it was still just a vehicle that maybe had the head that resembled that animal. Sometimes it was just like eyes painted on it. Also, Flashman was the first series to have more than one mecha. Moving back to Liveman, that was the first series to also have two mechs combined into one. Maskman was the first series where each ranger got their own individual mecha. In some series, the mecha was two rangers would pilot it. In Go-Go 5, red, blue, and yellow rangers have mechs, but the black and pink rangers pretty much sit on the sidelines for the majority of the series. Later on in the second half of the series, I think they might have gotten complaints about that, so they start having the pink and black rangers pilot the carrier Zord, as it's known as in America, that type of mech that would carry the machines. But for the most part, it was just the three rangers doing it. And then Fiveman has what is probably one of the best mech battles of all time that you will see in this video.
But I'm not done yet. Call right now and I'll triple the offer.
It's a brick.
できるのであろうか。ヒロ、ハイブロボにも水源を教えてくれ。
オッケー。
Who doesn't love a mech using drunken fists?
Am I the only one weirded out that the lady Fiveman have earrings
Oh
on their
yeah,
helmets?
they have earrings on their helmets, as does Maskman. And in Go Ranger, Momo Ranger, she has earrings on her mask, but they're used as bombs as well because she's the bomb expert.
Is there any like specific point where they start changing the yellow from a masculine to a feminine?
What's that?
Is there any particular point or like?
No, it constantly changes throughout the eras. Bioman was the first series to have a female Yellow Ranger, and then after that they just kept alternating. They pretty much, I think there's only been 2 Sentai series that haven't had a normal 2 or 3 that have not had a normal Yellow Ranger. But yeah, they've always alternated between female and male between the Rangers. Like in America, obviously for a while we had always had a female Yellow Ranger, which I find ironic because in Jude Ranger, the Yellow Ranger's name was Boy. So changing him to Trini was like, but you just changed Boy to a girl. Question real quick?
I was going to say, so like in both Power Rangers and Sentai, the only female Rangers were pink and yellow, but they never had a female Ranger.
They do change the color. In Liveman, the female Ranger's blue.
Was that the first time a blue was a female?
Yes.
Okay then.
And then Changeman, the female was also white.
Yes.
White and pink in that one.
And Jetman, it's blue and white for the female Rangers.
And then...
But Jetman is awesome.
Yeah, Jetman is like Gatchaman done
As we
right in
said
live
this
action.
morning, if you want to watch a live action Gatchaman, just watch Liveman. But Jetman, do not watch Gatchaman.
The live action.
Yeah.
So I have here, I'm going to be giving away a copy of Go-Go 5. The complete series that Shell Factory released earlier this year. There is a villain in the 80s.
An actor who played it twice.
An actor that appears twice, who is a famous anime voice actor. Can anyone name this voice actor? Or if you don't know him by name, well, let's see about first that.
Yeah.
Do you know? Oh, I thought you were raising your hand.
No, sorry.
I'll give you a hint that's not a very famous role you'll all get. Who's a fan of Fate Stay Night? Kotomine Kirei's voice actor in Japan.
Trying to go for ones that aren't obvious. Falcon and Escaflowne.
Okay, now you're going to make me look his IMDb page up. Because the only series I know him in, everybody would guess immediately.
That's why I'm not saying those two.
Well, I don't know his Japanese name, only their American name, so I'm out.
Okay, well, I guess Monte Cristo from Gankutsu is another good example of that.
Monte Cristo. Crispin Freeman has done his his English version in a lot of adaptations.
And Jameson Price.
Yeah, Jameson Price, and if it's Funimation, Chris Sabat's actually been his
No
voice.
shit, he played Sojiro Sakura in Persona 5.
Yes.
Oh no!
There you go.
I know that character!
There's your hint.
There's no his name!
There's your Japanese.
All right.
I need to play it.
And in JoJo's for the video games, and when this part 6 gets animated, he will be Poochie.
How about this? We show them because he's in these clips twice, and if they don't know, then we'll think of another question.
Yes.
So don't play the villains yet. I still gotta go through my few things.
Is that Ambassador Hell?
No, it's not Ambassador now.
So, villains of the franchise. Back throughout the 70s, the villains were pretty much there just to be killed by the Rangers so the Rangers could fight something other than air. Kind of like what the villains are currently in Super Sentai.
Oh, dear, yeah.
Well, Hirohisa Soda decided, you know what, let's make the villains a little bit more interesting. Our characters, our rangers, are pretty much cardboard, so we gotta do something, because the way it's done is, if you're familiar with Silver Age comic books, DC comics in the Silver Age were pretty much about the plot of having the hero solve the crime, end of story. Marvel Comics Silver Age was, we've got characters, they're Fantastic Four's a family, Spider-Man's a high schooler, they have personal lives just as much as they are superheroes. So they focused on the heroes and their character development. That's how I describe Sentai between the 80s and 90s. 80s is like Silver Age DC, 90s is like Silver Age Marvel. The 80s was the Rangers were heroes, they were heroic, they were cardboard. And then they fought, and that was the end of the day. Sometimes they got development, sometimes you might have a backstory and maybe a couple bits of dialogue. Villains, on the other hand, started to increase as time went on because Soda decided, well, let's make our villains really interesting so that we can have the heroes where the amp up that the hero needs to win because the villains will destroy the world, and people will see why the villains will destroy the world. So they got more complex. They started adding in more villains. Changeman was the one that really grasped that aspect with its villains, where all the villains pretty much got development. There's also a time when villains started getting upgrades, and they like to call out their upgrade names, as you will see in a clip where you could pretty much play a drinking game on this.
Oh, no joke.
And then there's villains that are kind of goofy, that are serious, and
they're cliche.
And cliche.
And the boring main villains usually.
So, because I got the 10-minute warning 2 minutes ago, let's get to the clips.
相当多分お久しゅうございます。相当閣下の下で再び戦えること光栄に存じます。よくぞ申した。
For dry, red eyes, clear eyes is awesome.
ネギのダイナモは私が飛ばす。
おきめ姫様のごちそうにはいやひらめの舞い踊り甘めつばしく面白く好きなたちの夢のうちやったどれ分でよくなる生き最高です。
つまりお前たちにはこの歌の意味がわからんのか。
はいな。
浦島太郎という男がユートピアへ行ったことを意味しているのだろう。
ユートピア。
弱いユートピアを見つける計画も立てた。
バイオマンはバイオ星人じゃない地球の人間だ。
バイオ粒子反応あり。
それは僕とバイオロボがずっと昔バイオマンのテントにバイオ粒子エネルギーを与えたからだ。地球を守るためなんだ。バイオ星は愚かな科学競争のために滅びた。宇宙で一番美しい星地球がバイオ星のように滅びないように僕たちは願ったんだ。今地球は反バイオ同盟と同じギアという恐ろしい科学力によって滅ぼされようとしている。バイオマンはそのギアと戦う戦士なんだよ。
バイオ粒子反応あり。
だから
バイオ粒子反応を持つ者は全て破壊する。
シルバ
この宇宙すべての星は西欧バズーのものだ。征服せよ。お任せください。遠征の旅に出てこれまで数々の星を撃ち滅ぼし
大聖団コズマの支配下に置いてまいりました私でございます。あのような星などものの数ではございません。
イルーク司令官、征服せよ。
Oh God. Perfect.
スーパーギルー、スーパーギルー、今よみがえったぞスーパーギルー、悪魔のスーパー能力が秘めるスーパーギルー、スーパーギルー、スーパーギルー。
Yeah, now it's a party.
ありとあらゆるものすべてが生きている。あまりにも生命の息吹が強くてむせ返りそうだ。海底ラーです。地球、なんという素晴らしい星。
我が改造実験帝国メスはこれまで数々の星で生命改造実験を繰り返してきた。だが未だ満足できる成果は得られなかった。
待て待て。
フラッシュは大きくなったな。
おお、なんと偉大なる王よ、全知全能の王よ、我らを導かれるその尊い御方の名を帝王ゼーバと申すなり。
この計画は我が武装頭脳軍ボルトの科学力を証明する素晴らしい計画だ。愚かな人間どもとライブマンとやらに思い知らせてやるがいい。願いましては63,511円なり93,041円なり56,923円なり74,948円なり116,662円なり962,111円では
567,196円なり。
男の顔は履歴書。俺の顔に傷つけたやつは許さないぜ。
What the hell am I looking at? When does this happen in the movie?
Now. You're looking at now, sir. Everything that happens now is happening now.
What happened to then?
Past then.
When?
Just now. We're at now.
Go back to then.
When?
Now.
Now?
Now.
I can't.
Why?
We missed it.
When?
Just now.
Real quick, well, I have about a minute and a half to finish this panel up. Fiveman has a pretty good mood going for it, and then they introduce these really weird things that kind of ruin the whole show for me. So I call them the true villains of Fiveman. it's hard to believe that what they are, but one of them looks like to me when they have the villain in this form, it looks kind of like Cartman cosplaying as one of the villains of this show. So let me show the true villains of Fiveman.
Anybody able to name the actor that we were talking about?
If not, alright, next question then. What is the first Super Sentai series that is technically a Heisei series? New?
Yes.
Who said Turbo Ranger? Congratulations. Alright, we have to get out of here, so thank you guys for coming once again. I hope you enjoyed the panel. Until next time, bye.